Hi everyone, welcome to Fast Intelligent Care. This is our last part 4 with Natasha Nutt from Movementum. In our previous episodes, we talked a little bit about her background in OT and manual handling, consulting and training, as well as a little bit of a background of Movementum and how they support individuals, carers and OTs. And then we talked about single-handed care and safe work quality care. Today's episode, we're going to do a little bit more in depth in terms of equipment prescription, looking at some very practical advice on how to avoid prescription mistakes, looking at standing hoists, passive hoists, and our slings. Great. Thank you, Natasha, for joining us for our part 4.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. And my first question is going to be a little bit more of a broader one, but what are some of the common equipment prescription mistakes that you see in general with manual handling equipment?
In general, I probably see therapists prescribing based on what they're familiar with or what's readily available, rather than really exploring in depth what option is going to best work for that individual. So sometimes that familiarity and also the lack of time or funding that can be available in a service agreement can mean, well, that's what I'm going to go with. Also making a prescription that caters to the individual's best day. So what they're capable of when everything's going well, rather than looking at having a solution in place that is still going to be effective and safe for them on their worst day. And another issue that I see in equipment prescription mistakes would be not involving the people who are going to be using the equipment in the trial. So it may be that the assessment and the trial is organised once the individual's care routine is finished for the day. So maybe the client may say, well, like, my carers leave at 10. If you want to come then, that would be great. And so we end up trialing things or exploring with the client themselves, which is great. That has to happen. But it means we can end up prescribing a solution that the carers who will end up using that equipment were never involved in. And that is often where I see a breakdown in equipment being abandoned or not being used longer term.
No, so that's really good tips and things that I haven't actually practically thought about. So it's really good that you've noticed those things. And what do you think is some information you have mentioned? Sometimes the information that's missing is the carer's perspective, but is there anything else that you feel like we miss in terms of our assessments or in our assessment process?
Yeah, I think sometimes getting a clear understanding on what the person's full day and their variability and function looks like. I do feel like at times when I go in to do an assessment, I know that I am seeing the person at their best. It is that classic thing, if someone knows that the OT is coming to do an assessment, it's like, well, I'm going to put on a show for them and I'm going to do my very best. So sometimes the information that can be missing is really that reality of, well, what does it look like towards the end of a day when you're fatigued? Can you still stand in that way? Can you still transfer with how you've demonstrated in the morning? Also, information that can be missed is, what have they tried in the past and what has been their experience with equipment that may be impacting how they're now perceiving what you're recommending. So really getting an understanding of what have they used in the past, why did they stop using it, why didn't they like it, what are their fears around that and fears around exploring equipment. That can be such useful information, because if we know that from the beginning, we can accommodate that and understand that and validate that with what we explore moving forward. Whereas if we don't know that someone had quite a traumatic experience with a hoist, for example, while they're in hospital, we may be just seeing it as, this person is resistant, this is what I need to recommend, I can't seem to move anywhere with it, but we were missing the information that there was a traumatic experience there that really needs to be addressed and dealt with before we can move forward.
And have you ever had a case where
that can be missed
the focus is very much on the physical ability of the client, but not necessarily consideration for cognition, the cognitive capacity required to actually use the equipment? And that might mean, instead of using a standing hoist, I'm using a passive hoist. Have you seen that be something that's missed?
Yes, absolutely. Yep, that we can miss what someone's actually capable of in terms of understanding the instructions for equipment and what needs to happen and their consistency with that. We can also miss what the care situation looks like and what the family are capable of or what the challenges are there. Also, just in terms of funded care that comes in, if there's a really high turnover of staff,
Yeah.
and support workers that come in to provide the support, that can change the way care is delivered and the effectiveness of any equipment that's prescribed really
Yeah.
quite substantially. So that can also be something that's missed. And ultimately, if we are working towards something that's not aligned with someone's goals, then we're really going to have
Yeah, it's
difficulty
very
there in getting any positive outcome. So sometimes we can be so limited in our time that we can be involved that we can miss that crucial step of understanding what is this individual's goals, what are they trying to achieve through this.
no, it's all really really good. I love the that you're showing a lot about or talking a lot about how we're looking at someone's previous experience, and I think that's something that sometimes you only notice that at a later stage when the equipment's already in place and you're seeing it not being used. So I think it's really good that that's addressed from the beginning. So when we look at a little bit more detail or specific equipment, what are some of the things that you would advise clinicians to consider when we're just looking at something like a standing aid or something like your Saracetes, your Oxford Up? What are some of the considerations you'd have there, and what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen in terms of prescription mistakes?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to a standing aid, as you've mentioned just previously, we need to look at, well, what is the physical capacity and also what's the cognitive capacity, because this is very much still an active, engaged form of transfer. So we need to make sure that we're recommending then something that the person has the weight bearing capacity, the upper limb strength, the grip, but also that they have the cognitive ability and that capacity to follow instruction, that ability to know to hold on until the task is complete, and also the motivation that
Yes.
do they actually want to stand or is that causing them pain? Because it could be that it's something that the care provider wants to do because that will make the task easier rather than going back to bed to complete a dressing task. But is the motivation there for the individual? Do they want to stand?
Yeah.
So it's exploring all of those things for a standing aid. I feel like something that often gets missed is the fact that a standing aid or a standing lifter is designed for a seated to a seated transfer. And so what can be missed is, how does someone get from lying down into their bed to sitting up onto the side to be ready to use that equipment? Because what we often see is that a standing aid or a standing lifter is prescribed, but then what remains is this highly complex, very physical task to get
Yeah.
someone from lying in their bed to sitting up on the side. And also keeping in mind that a lot of standing aids and standing lifters are going to be prescribed to be supported by one support worker, but then we've introduced this task that is highly physical to support someone from lying to sitting on the side of the bed by one
Yeah.
support worker. So missing just that full breadth of where does this equipment need to be used and what are the transfers that it needs to support, that can really place the sustainability of that piece of equipment and the effectiveness, it can place that in jeopardy.
I actually love that you added that because it just clicked into my mind. We get a lot of people that will, a lot of OTs that will talk about their clients sleeping in their recliner chairs, and a lot of times it's because it's actually an easier transfer to do. It's easier to do that seated transfer because, like I said, it's a sit to stand. You're not doing a lying to stand or lying to sitting over the bed transfer with that equipment, and a lot of times people end up like there's a multitude of reasons why they might be sleeping in the recliner, but one of the common ones is because it's just easier to get out. So, like you said, there's actually quite a complex task happening that we're maybe not fully covering, which could include other equipment coming in other than just that standing aid.
Yeah, and as the OT, I think we really have an obligation to make sure that what we're prescribing meets the full need of delivery of that care. And so if we skip the process of getting out of bed because we start the assessment once someone's
Yeah.
already in their wheelchair, we can then end up contributing to a care routine that is still largely unsafe for them to
Yeah.
get to the point of that seated position.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love that one. And when we're looking at standing hoists, so I know sometimes it's a bit in terms of the equipment names, the standing aids versus standing hoist. But when we're looking at a not a manual transfer aid, but a standing hoist that is actually physically lifting up the client rather than the client lifting themselves up, what are some of the considerations as well as common mistakes that you see with that piece of equipment?
The considerations, again, very similar to the standing aid in that you need to have that physical capacity to be able to actively be engaged with the stand and have some weight bearing capacity, and also the cognitive ability to engage. Because a standing aid, it is completely powered by the individual and the support workers just positioning it and moving it. A standing lifter, yes, we have the actuator that helps. It helps to bring someone to standing. But I think a common misconception is that then, well, the standing lifter will bring them to standing, but they still do have to be actively contributing to that transfer. They still need to be able to be taking weight through their legs. And yes, it is giving that support. What can be a challenge with it is someone's variable capacity. So it can be that you've assessed that they're able to do it at that point in time, but are they still able to do it at 6 o'clock in the evening when they're getting out of their recliner and going to bed? Often, what I can see is that either to save time or the number of transfers, that it can be tempting for a family member or a support worker to transport someone in their standing lifter. And so it may be that they help them get out of the recliner or off the lounge and then take them out of the lounge room across to the bedroom. And I think what therapists really need to be careful of there is that's not the designed intention for a piece of equipment like that. So if we know that there's a risk of that happening, we need to make sure we design care routines safely to make sure that clients and families and support workers know that they're not designed for transport, that they are a transfer aid, and that really it shouldn't leave the room. And so that someone can stand from the recliner and then you may position a commode underneath them or their wheelchair and then transport them in that and then do another lifted transfer with the equipment in another room. We're far safer if we transport a standing lifter without someone in it than with someone suspended in it. And that's where we have actually seen some really quite serious injuries when people have been transported in it. So I think as a prescribing therapist, we need to recognise that these can be amazing to be able to maintain someone's capacity to stand, but we also need to look at the functional capacity, the cognitive skills to be able to partner with that, and a care routine that is designed to use it as that equipment was intended, which is just an in-room supported standing transfer, not to transport someone through their home.
And I've also seen those standing hoists where someone technically has they have the core strength, they have the trunk control, but because they don't understand how the equipment works, they're actually just not engaging their core. So they're sitting kind of slumped, expecting the thing's going to pull me up, but not realizing I actually need to participate.
Yes.
I do need to engage my core, and I do love showing OTs how like they themselves, if I just ask them to like just look down, how they slip through the sling just because they're just not engaging their core, they're just kind of being passive, but technically they do have the core strength. So
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
the client understanding what this equipment is actually doing versus what they're supposed to be doing can make a big difference in the success of that piece of equipment.
Absolutely. I think also as therapists, it's important that we recognise what can be some of the hesitations for a client and a family member to move away from a standing lifter, because they can see that, well, this is helping me to continue standing. So it may be that the family's saying, well, we need that to keep happening because otherwise mum's not going to be standing anymore. Whereas if she's being dragged up into a position with the standing lifter while she's not actively standing.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be open to those conversations with family and help them understand what it can achieve, and that while they have that functional capacity to do that, they're amazing, but help
Yeah.
them understand the risks if we persist for longer. We also see support workers who persist with standing lifters beyond what is safe because they see that, well, the care service is going to take more time if we need
Mm.
to now do all the dressing on the bed rather
Yeah.
than in standing. So I think as therapists, we need to be aware of that. We need to be aware of what would be the reasons that people want to sustain use of this even beyond when it's safe.
Yes. And it works very well into my slots into my next question when we're starting to move from the equipment where we can still have the client actively participate going into something passive, like our floor passive hoists and our ceiling hoists or gantries. I know there's quite a bit of difficulty in terms of that transition because it's quite a big transition. Usually, your standing aids or manual transfer aids to your standing hoist is a little bit easier. Like you said, they still want mom or the family member to be able to stand, but then going to something where now it's very passive. The client's not really, there's not much they can participate in. Maybe it's that they get to control the handset of the hoist, but other than that, they're being lifted. They're not really engaging, unless it's maybe a hygiene thing, but they're not really engaging their core. They're not really participating. What are some of the considerations there? What are some of the mistakes, but also what are some of the things that is difficult in terms of that transition?
Yeah. I think one of the initial considerations really needs to be that absolutely it can feel like someone's not so actively engaged, but at the same time, a transfer is just a means of someone getting to where they need to go so that they can go and do what is meaningful to them. So manual handling is really just that gateway to what is it that you want to do with your day.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily going to be the most fulfilling task. It needs to be safe and effective and
Yeah.
repeatable, but it's not necessarily going to be something that is going to meet and tick all those boxes for someone being so incredibly engaged. And it really is just a gateway to what do they want to do with their day.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to have that in mind, that we're not taking away all of the amazing opportunities and goals and capacity in a person by introducing a hoist. I often find that, yes, there can be the barriers, but they're often fear and grief related. So if we can
Yeah.
have that conversation and open that conversation up. But also, if someone has been standing, they often, there's been discomfort in that, there's been fear, there's been pain if it has got to a point where it hasn't been a safe supported stand
Yeah.
anymore. And we can have families say, well, this is going to be taking away their independence. But if they've got to a point where they have two people physically holding them, helping to pull them up to stand or helping to bring them up into standing with the lifter, then that's not quality independence either. That's actually very dependent on equipment that's not working well, plus additional people. So introducing a hoist, if we can be showing that this is going to help you just to get from A to B to go on and be ready to do what you want to do with your day in a way that hasn't exhausted you, hasn't emptied out that bucket of energy that you have for a day, and actually can allow your care team to safely support you in that task. I also think that when it comes to slings and hoists, we now have so many options. So even though it can feel like independence and opportunities taken away, there's a lot of scope to be able to involve our clients in helping them see that we have options in the type of yoke that is used and how that changes their position. We have options in the design of slings so that if they don't want a sling that covers their whole head and they have head and neck control, well, that can be put in place. If they don't want a sling to stay under them because they don't want people to see it, well, then we make sure we have a sling that we can get out from under them. So there still is so much scope for them to be involved. But we also need to be aware of what are the functional limitations and boundaries for someone. So our assessment is so important, our honest and open conversation. And then if we do need to move forward to a hoist, it's acknowledging the grief that can exist there, but then helping to open that world of what are the opportunities and options.
I love that you framed it in such a like positive way. I can see you've had that conversation probably a lot of times, and I love that. And I feel like a lot of OTs, me myself, I'm gonna use that in terms of it's like a means to an end. It's like I'm opening up your world rather than limiting it because, like you said, you're getting them to go do something that's meaningful.
Absolutely.
Getting out of bed and into a wheelchair is not supposed to be maybe the most meaningful activity of your day. There's other things that I can allow for you. So I do love that positive perspective of it. I think that's going to make a big difference in terms of bringing in that equipment to a client because I think it does help them to see the benefit of it rather than seeing I'm losing something.
And we really don't want someone to be absolutely exhausted at the end of their morning care routine and where
Yeah,
they feel like, thank goodness that's over. Now I just need to rest until the carers come back in again in the afternoon. And
yeah.
it doesn't need to be like that.
Yeah, and I can imagine like having, like you said, that scenario of someone of two people holding you up. You'd have to have a lot of trust in your carers. There's probably like a lot of fear that they're going to get hurt, that you're going to get hurt. So I think having it safer, quicker, like there's less fatigue afterwards. I think that's a very positive way to look at it, is the benefits of it rather than looking at the negative part of it. And you talked a little bit about the slings, which I love because I feel like slings sometimes there's a lot more confidence in terms of uh, hoist prescription, but when it comes to slings, because there's so many options, it is also difficult to choose the right sling for the client. What are some quick tips that you would give to OTs when they are looking at a sling? I know there's so many, so we won't be able to touch on everything, but just a few things that you would say in terms of how do I choose the right sling? How do I make sure that I'm not just, I'm not just looking at the size,
Yeah,
but what
that's
are the
right.
things that I need to consider?
That's right. And it's really for slings, it's looking at what are the tasks that need to be achieved. Probably one of the biggest issues I see is when people are told or they have a perception that if I'm going to go to the toilet and I'm being hoisted onto a commode, well, I have to have a hygiene or a toileting sling. And that is not the case. The majority of slings still allow you to be able to be positioned so you can toilet.
Yeah.
So that would be probably the first thing, that
Yeah.
you do not need to be in a hygiene sling in order to go to the toilet. And that really we're looking at how does the sling provide the support in the places it needs to, but also help to optimize for the position that you need to land in. We
Yeah.
don't want a position where someone then is hoisted into a commode or a wheelchair and then they have to have a whole heap of manual adjustments. So really that's a partnership between the style of yoke on the hoist and the partnership with the sling to get really good positioning so that once you're there, where you land and where you've been positioned is where you can stay until you need to move again. We've got options now in terms of the different styles of fabric, which can be so beneficial in slings. It's not just a case of we just have a fabric one or a mesh one. There's lots of opportunities there. There's really the main tip I would say for therapists is to have a trial, have a practice. It's really hard to prescribe a sling from a catalogue. So if you can look at where does this person need support, and then based on the measurements, what size sling, and see if you can request for trial that size plus possibly one that's either side larger or smaller and a number of styles and fabrics. I'm really loving now the opportunity to have slings that give really great thigh support, because if people feel like it's that sensitivity of leg straps bunching up or riding up, we have a lot of options now that give that full thigh support.
Yeah.
So exploring them, but also looking at the realities of what does it take for a carer to get that sling in and out. And I think that needs to be considered in the prescription as well. So it's
I
where do
love
they
it.
need the support? What are the sensitivities with their sling and their positioning? And does it need to come in and out, and how often?
And I know you mentioned the Institute Sling in one of the previous episodes, which I think there's a lot more interest in that lately because I think living in slings underneath clients seems to be something that's becoming a lot more common. So I think the recognizing the importance of pressure care, but also clients' posture and positioning, but also the thinking about the manual handling aspect of it, taking into account the difficulty of it and how that can also cause its own pressure care problems or skin tears or skin shearing. So I think really good that there are that is that wide variety of slings to look at, and I love that you mentioned trial because I have seen a lot where we kind of want to do like a like for like replacement, but not necessarily considering like actually looking at was that sling actually doing the right job? Is there something
That's
better
right.
out there? And I think you mentioned in the one of the previous episodes also, or in the beginning of this episode, how we might have a familiarity with specific specific equipment, and then we want to save time or save funding to just prescribe the same thing that we know, but actually looking at what's available and what's best for the client.
And also, if where you were talking about the way a sling is removed can also create skin integrity issues, there's
Yeah.
also the reality if it's really quite hard to get a sling out, the reality that support workers or family are likely to leave the sling in.
Yeah.
So if we know that that's going to happen, we need to then be assessing and prescribing for an option that allows that to happen, because otherwise I often see that support workers will just leave the sling in place, even if it wasn't designed to be left in place, if it's
Yes.
actually too hard to remove and reposition. So, again, getting that full picture of what's actually taking place is so important.
Yes. Thank you so much. It's been really great having a chat with you. Really good advice. So I appreciate your time and your knowledge and experience. It's been really good. So I hope there will be lots of OTs that will be having a look at Movementum. And yeah, I appreciate your time and thank you for having a chat with me.
Thank
Yeah,
you so
thank
much,
you.
Chanel. And I just hope that it helps to ignite a manual handling passion in the
Yes,
therapists
I think
out
that's
there,
actually
because
it
it
is.
really is an exciting area to work in.
Yeah. No, I do enjoy it, and I think um, we're working on getting everyone more confident in it and also more passionate in it, and I love that. I do have one last question for you to end off this episode, and that is if you could sit down with your younger self with everything you know today. So let's say your first day as an OT, what would you tell yourself, or what advice would you give yourself?
Oh my goodness. um, As a new OT, I really was so diligent in feeling that I needed to learn everything and understand everything and tick every box. And I think what I'd tell myself is 25 years down the track, I am still learning every single day.
Yes.
So it is lifelong learning. Don't feel you need to have it all covered and mastered straight away. You will continue to learn. And I think I would tell myself that I picked the right profession.
Yeah, it is a very rewarding profession.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chanel.
Thank you. Have a lovely day, and I will hopefully see you again soon in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.